As a farmer, I don't think you have any chance of trying to improve your situation unless you first of all understand what your situation is. So where are you starting from? Is your farm a large emitter of greenhouse gases or a smaller emitter of greenhouse gases? And where are those greenhouse gases? Where are they coming from? Once you have identified that, then you can make a plan.
Hello, I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn.
You're Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast number 64, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability.
Farmers have been asked to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Is this achievable, or can the changes make our farms more sustainable in regards to environment and profitability? Dr. Tom O'Dwyer, head of the Teagasc Signpost Programme, joins us to discuss our options on farm. Tom, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks, Deirdre.
The Signpost Programme has been around a couple of years now. Can you tell us what it's all about?
Yes, the Signpost Programme, Deirdre, was launched in May of 2021. So we've over 2.5 years under our belt at this stage. So what it was established to do was to lead and support the transition of Irish farming towards more sustainable farming systems. And in more simpler language, I guess, Deirdre, the Signpost Programme was set up to help and support Irish farmers as they adjust their farming businesses, principally to achieve our climate targets, so to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, but also to help farmers farm more sustainably, so reduce greenhouse gases, reduce the risk of nutrient loss to water, improve biodiversity, and also, and this is quite important, I think, to ensure that farmers, as they farm, continue to be profitable. So farmers primarily farm and produce high quality food to make a living, to earn an income. So we have to look after that. And in the Signpost Programme, what we're trying to do is to try to ensure that we get those different elements of sustainability, the economic, the environmental, and the social, we get them all moving in the right direction, and that all I guess are in balance, that we're continuing to produce quality food. The farmers that are doing that are making a profit, and they're doing it in such a way that they're having less of a load on the landscape, or are gentler with nature, if you want to put it that way. So there's less greenhouse gas emissions, improved biodiversity, and better water quality.
Have you partnered up with other companies, etc., to deliver this programme?
Yes, a key feature of the Signpost Programme is that we are working with a lot of other partners across the Irish agri-food industry. In fact, we have over 60 partners who are partnering with Teagasc in the Signpost Programme. All of our major meat and milk processors, all of the main farm organisations, a number of industry representative bodies, our own parent department, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and a number of other organizations that either supply inputs to farmers or support farmers in some way as they go about their business.
So there's a big confidence in the whole programme then?
Well, there's a lot of partners in the programme, and I guess they're all looking at what we're trying to achieve, and they all have an interest in the Signpost Programme being successful. So you take, say, our meat and milk processors, and they're trying to sell our meat and milk on external markets. So 90% of our farm produce is exported. So they're competing with other processors from other countries right across the world. And one of the selling points is the fact the emissions of your kilo of milk or kilo of beef. That's what the processors are saying to us. They're facing challenges to show that Irish beef and milk is produced with a low carbon footprint. So they have an interest in supporting their suppliers to adjust their businesses so that they're producing meat and milk with low carbon footprint. So the partners in the programme have an interest in the programme succeeding. Yeah.
Tom, you mentioned targets, and there's nothing like a good target to pull everybody together in an industry to solve a problem. What are the targets? And I suppose there's whispers that, are they achievable? Is it too high of a mountain to climb, or do we have a suite of measures in place to meet that target?
If we were speaking, say, the middle of last year, maybe a little even before that, early last year, we would have been debating what the target for agriculture was going to be. At that stage, the target for Ireland, the national target, was identified. So Ireland overall has committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2050. So they're for the country as a whole, and there was a lot of debate then over, what reduction target would the energy sector have? What reduction target would the transport sector have? What reduction target would the agriculture farming sector have? So those targets were set the middle of last year, July 2022, and agriculture was allocated a target of reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 25% over the decade compared to a 2018 baseline. What's not yet set, and which is still up for discussion, is the target for greenhouse gas emissions reduction for the land use change and forestry section. So it's referred to as LULUCF, and the indication is that the target will be between 37 and 58%. So it's going to be somewhere in there in terms of emissions reduction. So that's a little bit in doubt, but the reduction target for agriculture is to reduce targets by emissions by 25% by 2030. And if you want to break that down a little further, the indication is that maybe about 40%, 2/5 of that would be achieved by the end of 2025, so about 10% reduction, and the balance then between the end of 2025 and 2030. So that's the kind of the target. So how are we doing? Or so your question, can the targets be met? Within Teagasc, we believe that there is a way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions while continuing to produce lots of healthy, nutritious food. That pathway includes changes to farming practices and the incorporation of new technologies into the way farmers farm. So yeah, we reckon it is possible, but it is going to require change on the part of farmers, and that's what the Signpost Programme is about. Is to try and help farmers to make those changes so that they can continue to produce food, they can continue to be profitable, but will have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions.
And what are the big tools in the toolbox, Tom, to meet what measures are? What are the main ones that you're looking for farmers to do at the moment?
So Teagasc published its marginal abatement cost curve in the summer of this year, and it effectively is our roadmap to reducing emissions, and it lays out the tools in the toolbox to use your own phrase, Cathal. So what are they? At the moment, the ones that are available to farmers are largely around reducing the reliance on chemical fertilizer. So any activity that can reduce the farm's reliance on chemical nitrogen. So for example, correcting soil pH through liming, improving soil P and K indices through application of slurries or manures or fertilizer P and K, better use of slurries and manures, and clover and multi-species swards. All those can contribute to the farm having to purchase less fertilizer nitrogen. So there's a cost saving for the farmer and there's a benefit to the environment. That's one. Number two then is for the fertilizer nitrogen you are going to use, it's recognized that using protected urea as your source of nitrogen is a positive in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it also actually reduces ammonia emissions compared to straight urea. So we're advising farmers to number one, switch to protected urea, and number two, to reduce the overall level of fertilizer nitrogen. Another one is to apply slurry using low emission slurry spreading technology, and that's a technology that's been well adopted by farmers. Longer grazing seasons, better quality animals in terms of their genetic merits, so higher EBI in your dairy cows, better star rating, the replacement index for your suckler cows, breeding better yolks as well. All that happens, so the animals can produce more from less. That's effectively what we're trying to do. And also there's some research now that suggests that, particularly on the dairy cow side, that these higher EBI cows generate less methane. So our focus at the moment, and sorry, the other one the other big one at the moment that we should talk about is the age of finishing of beef animals, because we have few enough technologies that can available to us currently that can help us to reduce methane emissions. But one of the technologies that is available to us is to look at how we manage our beef stock from birth to finish, and can we take a week or 2 weeks or a month off that finishing period, so that the animals are on the farm for less time, and that results in a saving in methane. So we are also working with farmers to try and reduce the age at finishing. That's another big target.
So Tom, your program is kind of putting research into practice. Which of those actions are the most urgent actions, or most achievable urgent actions for the farmers?
We have created a concept called the 12 steps. So these are 12 steps that farmers can take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And for us, step number one on the stairs is the easiest step. Okay, so it's it's the first step. Sometimes people say the first step is the more difficult step, but the way we've put it is that let's start this journey to reducing emissions with what we perceive to be the easiest step, or some of the easiest steps. And what we've identified as what we believe is one of the easiest steps is switching to protected urea. And the reason for that is that as a farmer, you're already spreading fertilizer nitrogen, so you've already got a fertilizer spreader. The change involves ordering a different fertilizer and setting up the fertilizer spreader, calibrating the fertilizer spreader to spread urea rather than another product. So we think that's a reasonably easy switch. There's not a lot of training or extra effort required, but it is a switch nonetheless. So I'm not diminishing the size of the switch for any individual farmer. But if you compare that to something like, say, switching your breeding practice or incorporating clover across your entire farm, those latter two examples require a lot more management of your farming operation over multiple years. So yeah, we think the easier switches, some of the easier ones are like protected urea, applying lime, better use of slurries. They're we believe some of the easier ones, but some of the harder ones then are in relation to that require more management and more management by the farmer over a longer time period. And then that's not to say at all, Deirdre, about the technologies that Teagasc has identified which can reduce emissions that aren't available to farmers yet. Okay, so they're being researched by Teagasc at the moment. So, and I'm including here the likes of feed additives to reduce methane, and also slurry additives to reduce methane from slurry. And these are being researched at our research facilities in Moore Park and Johnstown Castle and Grange. Over the last number of years, they're showing very good promise, but they're just not commercially available to farmers yet. So once they become commercially available, we'll have more tools in the toolbox, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to you maybe in future years and say, look, there's new products available now that can help to reduce methane from slurry. They're available. We know from research that they work. The challenge then might well become for those two products is the cost. Because for the likes of protected urea or the likes of lime, we can say to farmers that if you switch to protected urea, you will save money. If you apply lime to your land, you will get a return on your investment. The land will grow more grass, so that's good. Whereas with the likes of feed additives, it looks like the only plus will be that you'll reduce emissions. Now that's a good thing, but will farmers be willing to pay for that? So that's something that's going to have to be, I think, teased out over the next number of years. But there are technologies that are being researched and they will come on stream in the next number of years.
Tom, you've mentioned your 12 steps. It's like a stairs, and you have to start on step one, and there's no silver bullet. You accumulate each step you go up, it's more improvements, and we have to reduce our emissions by 2030. And what I just, from judging what you're saying, the practice change you're asking for is really good practice change for our agricultural systems, and we'll have a better farm for it. And by the sound of things, there's a bag of money at the top of that stairs, as well as reducing our gaseous emissions. And you mentioned feed additives, but if we don't meet our emission targets, we're going to get penalised in some way anyway. So what I would say is we know that this will work, but how are you going to convince farmers that that this will actually work? And I think, can you tell us a bit how your demonstration farms might add towards that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Cathal. We have evidence from research that the technologies that we're recommending work. But in order to achieve the reduction in emissions that's required from Irish farming, we need wide-scale adoption of these technologies on all farm types. So, dairy farms, beef farms, sheep farms, tillage farms, all those farmers have to, I suppose, recognise the challenge that's facing Irish farming, and that every individual farmer can play a part. I suppose a little different to the areas, Cathal, that you yourself and Deirdre work on in terms of water quality. For water quality, if there's a problem in a stream in South Kilkenny, you have to resolve that issue in South Kilkenny on that stream. You could go up and do great work on a river in Mayo, but it'll make no difference to the stream in South Kilkenny. Whereas with gaseous emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, we have one atmosphere. So any gas that's released goes up into the atmosphere. So, a ton of fertilizer saved in South Kilkenny, a ton of nitrogen fertilizer saved in South Kilkenny, the same difference will be achieved if that ton of fertilizer is saved in Mayo. So that's an important difference between greenhouse gas emissions and water quality, I guess. Every farmer can play a part. So that's important. Sorry. The role of demonstration farms then. So, yeah, we believe, and within Teagasc we have a lot of experience over many years of working with demonstration farms, and we see two roles for demonstration farms and demonstration farmers. One is that the farmer works with an advisor to incorporate technologies into their farming system, and over the years that could be better grassland management, it could have been better breeding, it could have been improved milk quality or better milk protein content. And the farmer will have made changes working with the advisor, and Teagasc then monitors that process over time and is able to tell the story of the change. And we have seen that demonstration farmers can play a key role in terms of sharing their messages with other farmers, and that the demonstration farm becomes effectively a space for learning by other farmers primarily, but also for other advisors or industry partners, that they can see what's possible on a commercial farm. And it's not, it's not a research experiment. So, there's it's not set up in a research experiment. It's on a real farm, and it's encountering the same challenges that other farmers face in that locality, whether that be weather, or whether it be soil type, or whether it be milk price, or whatever the challenges are faced by the general farming population, they're faced by the demonstration farmer. I suppose the only difference is the demonstration farmer is supported by an advisor, so has a high degree of advisory support. So that, I guess, that is a point of difference. But the farm works with the advisor, adopts the technology or makes the change on farm, and then works with the advisor to share those stories so that other farmers can learn from the demonstration farmer. So we have deliberately put demonstration farms at the center of our Signpost program, and we believe we're getting good traction with those farmers, and we're beginning to see changes happening on the Signpost farms as a result of the efforts of the advisors working with the farmers and of the farmers themselves.
So what's the progress of the Signpost programme so far, Tom? Have you seen any evidence of improvements, and what measurements can you take to show these improvements?
So it's a very good question. an organization like Teagasc, we put a lot of store by measurement and monitoring and I suppose data and science and so on. So we are recording the performance of the various signpost farms, so we can highlight their progress in relation to the adoption of the mitigation actions that we've spoken about earlier in the interview. So Cathal used the term tools in the toolbox. So how are the signpost farms performing in relation to the tools that are available to them to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So for example, if we look at our signpost dairy farmers, we can see that of the nitrogen that they spread in 2022, 52% was protected urea. Now, for a typical dairy farmer in the same year, it was about 15%. So they're, as an example, so the group of demonstration dairy farmers, they've taken a bigger step in switching towards protected urea than the typical farmer, and that's of help to the group of demonstration farmers. It's lowering their greenhouse gas emissions. And then the opportunity is there for the general farmer to say, well, if the demonstration farmer can use 51% of their fertilizer nitrogen as protected urea, maybe I could do too. Okay. They've also reduced their fertilizer nitrogen by 17% versus 2021. For the typical farmer, the reduction in fertilizer nitrogen was about 5% in that same period. So for those two key technologies, the demonstration farmers have gone further than the typical dairy farmer went in that period. And in terms of cattle farmers, we can see again that the usage of protected urea is at 38%, and that's higher again than the typical cattle farmer. And the reduction in fertilizer usage was about 14%, and again a higher reduction than was typical, or than was achieved on the typical farmer. And then we can also go on and we can look at their greenhouse gas emissions. So we can take measurements to allow us to calculate their greenhouse gas emissions. And on our dairy farms, we can see that their greenhouse gas emissions showed very little change between 2021 and 22, largely because of an increase in animal numbers. So the things that they did well, the reduction in fertilizer use, the more protected urea, that helped to reduce emissions. But then there was one or two extra cows kept on average, or animals kept on average, and that then outweighed the gains made in terms of reducing emissions through the adoption of technologies. So to me, what that paints a picture of, Deirdre, is the challenge facing individual farmers to reduce emissions, because there's a lot of different parts come together in producing food. So and you have to get them all lined up if it's going to follow through with a reduction in emissions on the farm.
One can offset another.
One can potentially offset another, and it's something that's coming up from some of the farmers on the program, that they're saying, but we made great strides. We switched to protected urea. We cut our fertilizer nitrogen use. We added a lot more clover into the grassland swards. We made better use of our slurry. Our EBI is continuing to grow. So a lot of the things were moving in the right direction. And then there was, but we had one or two extra animals on the farm, and that has negated all the good work. And I suppose what to bear in mind, that when we talk about fertilizer nitrogen and the impact it can have on greenhouse gas emissions, about 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions are from our use of chemical fertilizers. So you could do a fantastic job on improving your use of chemical fertilizers, but you're only going to have an impact on about 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions for the farm. So it is challenging, but we are making progress in terms of the adoption of technologies, and to me that's the first step for an individual farmer, and then we can look at nationally then at other trends as groups of farmers come together. But for an individual farmer, the first step has to be about the adoption of the mitigation technologies.
There's a lot done in the program so far, and I'm really interested in the findings that have come up to date and the intricacies and complexity of what you're trying to achieve. But what's next for the program?
So yeah, for me, we need a couple of more years data, to have confidence in our measurements, I guess. Okay, so we've 2021 was a baseline year. We established a baseline. 2022 then is the second year, so we're just about ready to publish our 2022 results, and hopefully by the early parts of next year we should have a third year's data together. And once you have 3 years of data, I think you're beginning to say, yeah, we can have some confidence now that we know how the farm is performing. We have confidence in, we can start to say there's trends emerging or not. After 2 years, you're always suspicious as to, is that a trend, or is it just is it just 2 points on a line? So yeah, so that's the first thing. The next thing for me then as well is, and it came up very strongly in a workshop we held recently about the program, was this notion of integration came up quite strongly. And what I took for that was, if we can integrate other elements into the program, so as well as looking after the greenhouse gases, can we also do something to help biodiversity? And that might also help, say, our hedgerows, in terms our trees on the farm, and that might help in terms of storing carbon as well. So how do we integrate the biodiversity piece better into the Signpost program overall? And also on the theme of integration, I think the results that I described to Deirdre were all about the emissions. But there's another part to the equation called sequestration, because our farms also, as our farming activities create or generate greenhouse gas emissions. That's a fact. And we have to work to try and reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions generated through our farming activities. But there's also a second side to the equation, and that's about storing carbon. Farms also store carbon. They take carbon dioxide in through the process of photosynthesis. Some of that then is respired again overnight. So there's photosynthesis and respiration every 24 hours. But there's always a balance, either a positive or a negative, and where there is more photosynthesis than respiration, well then that surplus has to be stored somewhere, and it's stored in our leaves, and when the leaves die and rot into the ground, it's stored in the soil. Okay, so our soils store carbon. So we have to get and we are working on getting a measure of the amount of carbon stored in our soils. And when we have that, my ambition would be that, as well as being able to talk to you about the amount of emissions, that we can say, yeah, that's on the negative side of the page, but on the positive side of the page, we've managed to store an additional so many kilos or tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And we can say then the net position for an individual farm is one minus the other. I'd like to think we'll get there. We will get there, and hopefully we'll get there. In the next year or two, that we have a good handle on the emissions. We're working on getting a handle on the level of sequestration, and when we have both figures, we should be able to create a net picture for the farm. And I think that could be important. And also then, I suppose, kind of aligned with that, Cathal, is that there's a lot of discussion ongoing at the moment about the introduction of carbon farming. And to me, having a measure of emissions, having a measure of sequestration will allow farmers then, if in time, to participate in a carbon farming market, so that if their farm is storing carbon dioxide and locking it away, that there could be a value on that, a monetary value on that. So I guess that's maybe that's maybe a couple of years away yet, but I think we have to keep that in mind as we work through the program.
You sound like you're very busy, Tom, but you're lucky you have a great team of people around you. We're at the beginning of the Signpost Sustainability Month. What have you planned for this month, Tom?
Yeah, so my colleague Siobhan Kavanagh took a lead on this, Deirdre. So what we have planned are a number of farm walks, some of which have already happened. A number of farm walks happened in the first week of October on the Signpost farms. Further walks will happen as we go through October. We've also planned to publish a number of articles to our webpage and a number of videos to our social media channels. So it's a combination of farm walks, articles and publications, and presence on social media over the month of October. And our focus for the month is to try and highlight the importance to farmers of knowing the emissions profile for their own farm. So the theme for the month is know your number, make a plan. So the idea there is that every farmer should be able to access an emissions profile for their farm through the AgNav platform, or well, at least dairy and beef farmers have that opportunity anyway. So all dairy and beef farmers. So AgNav is the new digital sustainability platform, and you as a farmer, I don't think you have any chance of trying to improve your situation unless you first of all understand what your situation is. So where are you starting from? Is your farm a large emitter of greenhouse gases or a smaller emitter of greenhouse gases? And where are those greenhouse gases? Where are they coming from? And once you have identified that along with your advisor, well, then you can make a plan. You can say, I can work on reducing fertilizer nitrogen, or maybe I've already reduced fertilizer nitrogen. There's nothing more I can do there. So what's the next step for me? So you're looking to see, what further changes you can make. So that's available, and that's a focus for this month, to try and encourage more farmers to understand the emissions profile for their farm, so that it's it doesn't really matter what's happening on your neighbour's farm. You as an individual farmer have control over what happens inside your farm gate. So you have to understand what's going on in my farm, what activities are generating emissions, and what can I do to reduce those emissions.
Tom, it's very clear that the Signpost Programme has a very important role in I suppose, the future of Irish agriculture in regards to reducing our emissions. And I think I'm getting a message loud and clear from you today to not to forget that there is a target looming 2030, and it won't be long about coming. So we have to hit the road running. And I know water quality is all over the headlines at the moment, but equally, it's the very same for gaseous emissions, that we have to target that as well and try and meet those goals. Look, the very best luck in the future of the programme, and I'm looking forward to see future developments and technologies coming down the line from you. Thanks very much for joining us, Tom.
Thanks, Cathal. Thanks, Deirdre.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Dr. Tom O'Dwyer, head of the Teagasc Signpost Programme, for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, Signpost to Farm Sustainability.